Sorry, you just caught me off guard there. Say that again. We'll retake that.
Okay.
Yeah, go.
Chloe's DMs. Okay. My favourite segment of the week, let's be honest. Okay, so this is a great one. And Raph, I don't think you've seen this. I think this is just in my DMs. This is awesome. Okay, so this is from the lovely Erica. Hi, Chloe. I'm a Breathe grad from October 2020 and an Elephants fan since day one. Woo!
Shout out, Erica.
Shout out, Erica. We love that. I've got a question for you. Re side-lying leg lifts on the mat. I love a bit of side-lying leg lifts on the mat. In fact, there's going to be some of that in my mat masterclass tonight. Anyway, I diverged. Back to the question. I love this exercise and love to teach it to my clients to get them to try and lift their leg all the way up to the ceiling and lower it back down so it's hovering off the other leg. I'm on holidays at the moment, have been to a mat class where the teacher taught this move but told us all to only lift the leg as high as the hip and then lower it. It's not nearly as much fun. Her reasoning was to prevent hyperextension in the hip. So listeners,
that was a verbal eye roll.
I think we've mentioned that Raph and I are now recording these sat across from each other, and as that was kind of like if both of our faces then were a little bit, like I think our eyes literally rolled back in our head. It's not nearly as much fun. Her reasoning was to prevent hyperextension in the hip. I don't think this sounds like it has any merit to it. When I do a full expression of the move, I feel much more burn than only lifting it a foot. Do you and Raph have any insights? Thank you so much.
Yeah, that is just
what, Raph?
BS.
Total bullshit. And we've spoken about oh man, it's such a freaking buzzword in the Pilates industry. Don't hyperextend this. Don't hyperextend that. Stabilize this. Stabilize that. Don't dump into your lower back. Don't straighten your legs.
What is hyperextension in the hip joint there, Chloe? How can you tell if you're hyperextending your hip joint?
I would say in abduction. Which is what you're doing there.
Because side-lying leg series is abduction. Right?
Are we talking a dislocate? Like, is that what we're talking?
Hyperextension is extension beyond the usual range of motion, right? That's the textbook definition of hyperextension. In side-lying leg series, you're not extending at all. There's no extension. You're probably in neutral or slight flexion most of the time. So there's no freaking hyperextend, dude. It's not a thing.
So the extension is when you are taking your leg behind
the body,
right? Not into abduction. Abduction is when you're taking the leg out to the side.
That's abduction. Yeah.
So
not the same thing. Anyway, and
apart from it not being the same thing, and we know that to me it sounds like potentially if I'm giving some props, not props, what's the word I'm looking for? If I'm giving some compassion to that instructor saying those words, I would say this might be a parrot cue.
Yeah, this is one of those ones you hear someone else yelling it out, so you yell it out.
This is a parrot cue. You've heard it before.
Pieces of eight.
So cute. So you've heard it before and you're concerned maybe that you are going to call, because if we're saying hyperextend, well, there's some sort of fear around that we are going to inadvertently or overtly injure our clients, right? Otherwise, why would you even be putting something in like that? So I want to be mindful of not writing off this other instructor because maybe you only know what you know, right? So she'd be doing the best by her clients in her own...
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it is totally inaccurate. Biomechanically, it's totally inaccurate.
Yeah.
But even... as a necessary cue, it's it's just inaccurate.
And I think you're 100% right that we should talk about that. It's a really silly idea. It's an incoherent idea because it's talking about hyperextension and confusing it with abduction for a start. But that's not to cast aspersions on the person that espoused that. I'm sure that person, like you say, is doing the best they can with what they've got and have all the best intentions in the world. And, once you know better, you do better. But I think, that really kind of epitomizes the sort of thing that we're trying to change in this industry is people spreading, fear-based, nonsensical information that just doesn't even make sense in terms of common sense, let alone it's not scientific in any way. And people just hear something that sounds like fearful and then repeat it and just spread the wrong-headed information,
Correct. And then that breeds fear of movement in your clients. And
so we'd want to, but let's think about it even a little bit more. We want to avoid, quote, hyperextension of the hip, which is taking the leg behind the body. That's extension of the hip, right? So does that mean, okay, we shouldn't do front splits on the reform? What about lunges? So are they off as well? Because if it's bad to hyperextend the hip, we should avoid those positions that hyperextend the hip, right? Which is when the leg's behind the body more than normal. So that's those exercises. What about, say, bird dog, like donkey kicks when you're on all fours? What about shoulder bridge, where you lift your hips up as high as you can? The hips in hyperextension there. Yeah. What about something like high bridge on the reformer? Hips are in hyperextension. Both hips are in hyperextension in that position. Shit.
Just everyone wrap yourselves in cotton wool, stop moving, walk around like tin men. It's just, it's a nonsensical cue.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's also inaccurate. I don't want to, though, shame that instructor because I fully believe that instructor is thinking they're doing the best thing by their clients. They're not, but they're coming from, I'm sure they're coming from a good place.
100%.
So hopefully they get the chance to continue upskilling, continue learning, continue.
I guess
maybe send them some episodes of Pilates Elephants.
Yeah, I guess what I would hope that people would start to do, because we just got through saying when you know better, you do better and whatever. But I guess what I would hope that people would start to do, and this is the change that we're trying to promote in the industry, is that when people are, hear that stuff, so maybe that instructor that said that, maybe they learned that in their training course, right? Yeah. Or maybe they heard it from someone that they respect in the industry or whatever. But when people hear stuff, I would hope that we could move towards a place where people kind of, and they don't understand it, right? So this person plainly didn't understand it, because if they did understand it, they wouldn't have said abduction is hyperextension, right? So when you hear something you don't understand, instead of thinking I must be dumb, I don't understand it, or it's not my place to question that, or whatever people think, right? Just kind of sitting there and scratching your head for a minute and going, all right, so hyperextension, I'm not actually clear on what hyperextension is. Right, because obviously this person's not clear on what hyperextension is, because they're confusing it with abduction, right? So someone yelled out that cue, or their trainer told them that, and they're sitting there probably thinking gee, I'm not quite clear on what we're talking about here, but it sounds like something I want to avoid. So, I better just yell out that same cue. But if instead we could move to a place where someone tells, a class full of people, okay, don't hyperextend your hip in side-lying leg series, right? And I'm sitting at the back there thinking I'm not really sure what we're talking about here. This doesn't make sense to me, right? Just put up your hand and go, I'm sorry, I'm a bit thick here, but could you please explain this? It doesn't make sense to me what you just said, and we could just open up that dialogue to have a conversation where we don't understand something. It doesn't make sense, right? And it's okay, so, what is hyperextension, and how can I tell if I'm hyperextending? Because if we want to avoid doing that, I want to know what other moves should I avoid, right?
I don't think you have to say I'm a bit thick. Just say, hey, I'd like some clarity on, could you extrapolate on what hyperextension means to you, or what,
Yeah. And secondly, well, all right, well, if hyperextension's bad, can you explain to me what's bad about it?
Yeah.
How hyperextending could cause a problem. What's the mechanism by which that could occur?
When we find, as another instructor, when we find ourselves in a group class, that is not the place in that moment. So what Raph's talking about there is in a training situation, course, not when you've gone to another instructor's class. No. That's really disrespectful. Yeah. If you've got any questions for them, you hold tight until the end of the class and you ask the questions, one-on-one, which I fully encourage as well.
Radical candor.
Yeah, so I absolutely encourage that. But yes, please don't do it in the middle of their class. It's a good way to choke an instructor. Yeah, so we just do it respectfully. But yes, bottom line is it ain't a thing. Total BS. Keep getting your clients, Erica, doing those big old side kicks to the side. Go for gold.
Kick up to the ceiling.
Kick up to the ceiling. Yeah, cool.